Hi everyone, it's Christina, and today I'm sharing an easy way to practice sewing on a sewing machine with my set of free sewing practice sheets. I've included the link in my description box below so you can download them when you're ready. You will not need to thread your needle or use a bobbin to practice on these sheets. I've included a variety of pre-printed lines and designs, including straight lines, curves, and corners. When you're starting out, you want to make sure that you center the line under the needle and you lower your presser foot and then you start sewing away. I recommend using a 2 to 2.5 millimeter stitch length when you're practicing. I also recommend using either a universal or sharp needle to practice your stitches here. It's just a much easier way to sew through paper, and you don't want to mix your paper and fabric needles. When sewing corners, make sure that you keep your needle pierced through the paper, and then you lift your presser foot and then pivot the paper. And then you lower the presser foot and continue sewing. I've included a couple different kind of square corner shapes. This way you get more practice with how to lift and pivot and sew sharp corners when you're sewing. And just remember, you don't have to be perfect with all of your stitching through these lines and patterns. This is all just to help you become more comfortable with your sewing machine. And as your stitching improves, you can move on to more complex patterns like even tighter corners and smaller curves. And remember not to rush. You can take your time, especially when you're sewing curve lines. So I included two of these circles here for you to practice. Again, take your time. You might even have to lift your presser foot a couple times and realign and pivot just to see, how close you can get to keeping on the curved lines. So don't worry, just keep practicing. You'll get better and better, I promise. I have all of these details listed in my blog post dedicated to these sewing practice sheets as well, so you can use that for reference. Now, if it makes it easier, you can cut the different shapes out, and this way you can kind of just practice on specific shapes and designs. It might make it easier for you just to get used to using like a smaller piece of the paper design instead of using the whole sheet. And remember not to have to forcefully push or pull the fabric underneath the needle as it's feeding through. It should just feel like you're lightly guiding the paper underneath the needle plate while you're sewing along. You can also practice your zigzag sewing just using the straight designs and whichever curve ones you want as well. Just make sure that you center the needle on top of the line or guidelines that you're using. And you can just use a zigzag stitch, whichever width you prefer. But I would say stick around 2.5 to 3 millimeter if you're practicing zigzags to start. And just another reminder that you do want to keep your paper sewing and your fabric sewing needles, pins, scissors separate from each other because the second you pierce through the paper with the needle, it's going to be too dull to sew through fabric. So just keep that in mind. And I'm sure you've noticed that I have a Halloween theme with these, so I think it's good to celebrate Halloween all year round. If you celebrate it once a year, not a problem either. You can still have fun with this. So there's actually a really large bat that I have included in this set, and it's going to be a little complex. It's probably the most advanced design to practice sewing on. So use that as like your end goal, like the boss level of the practice sewing sheets challenge. So have fun with it. And again, you'll get there. The more you practice, just enjoy it, okay? I added the coffin in especially because I wanted you to get used to sewing on angles that aren't always 90 degrees, like sharp corners. So I think it's a fun way to kind of practice different types. And the underside would look something like this when you're done. Now, a great way to keep track of your progress is to date and initial your practice sheets. This way you can track the progress of your sewing and how your skills are improving over time. Now, my biggest tip for how to store your practice sewing machine needles is I like to keep them in old pill containers. Like I have this one right here. This is how you can keep your old needles kind of away from your fabric sewing needles. And it really just keeps it from getting mixed in with the needles that you're using right now. So a really great way to just keep them handy whenever you feel like practicing again. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Subscribe for more free sewing tips and tutorials.